Three, two. And now we're here returning to the show. Dacre Stoker is back. Welcome, sir.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for having me. It's a great occasion to be here talking Nosferatu, their 100th, while I'm
100th,
heading,
yes,
spreading the word on Bram Stoker's 125th. So, double centuries here, guys.
Well, we definitely appreciate you, and we'll take the time because I know you're a busy man normally, but I imagine October, this time of year, you are really stacked and busy.
Yeah, this is like the Super Bowl in the Stoker family. Every October, we kind of rank it up a little bit, find out where the best place is to be on Halloween weekend, who's going to provide me the best resources and the best visibility and want me the baddest. So it all starts out here in California at the moment, doing the 125th tour here and heading back east soon, and then heading to Dublin, Ireland for Halloween weekend and places in between. So great to be here with you guys, though, to chat Nosferatu.
Nosferatu. So the movie 1922 was made. Now, forgive me, but it seems like, I don't know. I'm kind of curious as to what your feelings are on this. The reputation is that your family wasn't particularly happy with this movie and almost destroyed every single copy of it.
Well, that's it. It's an interesting subject within the family, but I'd say first of all, all one of these things, all's well that ends well. I'll take you through a couple of steps in that. Florence, when Bram Stoker died, he did go to great lengths to protect the dramatic rights of Dracula. He had a staged reading at the Lyceum Theater 8 days before the novel came out. He had to cut and paste a couple of copies of Dracula to make his one script that he passed around to all the different stagehands who just humored Bram and said, "Yeah, we'll read this when you." It was just a stage reading. It was not a performance, although there were 3 people in the audience. They had to have a playbill. These were the rules of the Lord Chamberlain's office at the time to protect the dramatic rights of your novel. And Bram did that, and he did it to some of his other novels as well. Being a stage manager, he knew what was up and how to do that. So luckily, he protected that, because Michael, when he died, he didn't get any inheritance from Henry Irving. He didn't get any pension from Henry Irving. So the last 10 to 12 years of his life were pretty rough. He didn't have much of an income. He was making it off of royalties of book sales, and they're not great nowadays, but they were worse even back in those days.
I was going to say, Dracula wasn't like a huge bestseller. It wasn't on the New York Times list, right?
No, I mean, it did pick up some good momentum, and it got greater later on when the book was adapted onto stage and onto screen, but not during Bram's life. It wasn't a big money earner. So sadly, he left his wife, with a decent income, an estate that had some value, but they didn't own a home. They were renting homes, and she did have a son who was a chartered accountant, so he made some money. He could take care of Mama. But the thing is, she was working very hard with Hamilton Dean, and then later Dean and Balderston, to turn Dracula into a stage play. And so remember, 1912 was when Bram died. She started all this effort in 1922. So 10 years later, she did get some things going with stage adaptations, and she did get some money when it finally, 1924, went on stage, and then 1927 when it came to America. So the dramatic rights were picking up some momentum, and we had Raymond Huntley playing Dracula, of course, Bela Lugosi later on. But in the background of all this, is obviously the film from Germany, from Prana Films, Nosferatu, that in 22 came out, and it actually came out and freely said, openly adapted by Bram Stoker's Dracula. And they didn't make any effort to contact Mrs. Stoker. They didn't make any effort to hide the fact that this was an adaptation. And it's not the first time they did it. They actually did it earlier with Robert Louis Stevenson's one of his books.
That's right. They did a Jekyll, because Murnau did a Jekyll and Hyde. I don't think it exists anymore, but I don't think I think that film's been lost. But yeah, they did do that with that one too.
Which was also, and I use the term pirated, in a nice way. It is what it is. They didn't get a license, but you also have to realize back in the day, there was not a lot of licensing of books to turn into films going on. So sadly, we don't really know what their perspective was. I have been working with a German film historian, Holger Mandel, who has dug like crazy throughout German film archives, because like me, we want to know, the truth. You can't handle the truth. We want to know the truth. And so it was like non-existent. Obviously, there were fires, there was bombing. Who knows why that side of the court records don't exist? But we have no record of they said, well, we tried to get hold of Mrs. Stoker, but she never answered the emails, or or she didn't show up for the meeting. We don't know if they were just being totally blasé about it, or if there was just angst between Germany and England, leading after World War One. What was the karma? We don't know. What we do know is, and luckily, Mrs. Stoker did go and approach the Independent Society of Authors in London, and her husband was a member of that society. So she went to them saying, "Look, Bram was a member. You got to help us here. This is what you're in existence for." Although they haven't had film to copyright infringements at that point, but it's like, you're a legal society. This is what you do. And it was, I've seen the letters back and forth, because they exist in the British Museum Library, which is a great source of records for this. So I did my research for this article my son and I wrote for Scream Magazine way back in May, but it was one-sided. And even though I had the German fellow friend of mine, Mandel, over there trying to find his side, we couldn't. He could find the British side as well. And what we found was, number one, it was very hard for the female, Florence Stoker, to get this all-male society to back her. She had to cajole them. She had to beat them upside the head. She had to get the secretary shamed to actually decide back them. Here's the problem. She wasn't a member. She had to join the society. She wasn't. They didn't have a lot of dues racked up from Florence Stoker, and they knew that this was going to be an expensive court case. So they actually embarked on it knowing this was not going to be a great money winner for them. 2.5 years later, gents, as you guys probably know, the German courts ruled in favor of the Independent Society of Authors and Mrs. Stoker. Piranha Film then goes and claims bankruptcy. Now, Holder mentioned to me, and some of the information that I've got from other sources, it wasn't just the fact they didn't just claim bankruptcy because they lost. They were very extravagant, and you probably know this about Murnau and all of his the opening night in Berlin, and they had actually sent films to 6 or 7 different cities around the world, trying to get previews of it, get input from people. So this was an extravagant group of guys in the early part of the days when there was not a lot of money in film, and they had spent a lot of money. So when it came time for the court case, we don't even know what the record said, how much restitution they had to pay. All we know is they claimed bankruptcy. So the German court, not Mrs. Stoker, the German court said, well, then you're going to have to destroy the copies of the film. So they said, well, that's not going to be easy. We've only got 1 or 2 copies here, and now it gets murky. And I can only just assume that, again, this is picked up from different places. The Independent Society of Authors, their lawyer, their German lawyer, told them, well, if we want to pursue all the other countries where the copies are, we're going to have to engage in attorneys in those countries.
Wow.
So they just like cut it right there and said, to Mrs. Stoker, sorry, we can't afford that. We've done what we're supposed to do. You got your judgment, and they're out there. So it gets better, though, because one of the places where it went was America. And in America, since the US hadn't signed the Berne Convention, they were able to freely show this film. And it was kind of making, and you guys probably know better than I, because I'm not a big film buff, but there's underground cinema, there's coffee houses, there's these secret little places. The film was making its rounds in America, and Mrs. Stoker was worried, rightfully so, after she had done the right thing and sold the stage rights to Dean and Balderston, the 3 of them owned them, that she was going to be unable to profit from the legal sale of the rights to Universal. because the
Mhm.
pirated version was floating around in America. And she was, openly concerned. I could see this in the letters. Why would they want to buy or sell the rights to us if somebody can just watch Nosferatu? Now, David Skoll is helpful in this because he's done a lot of research as well. I don't know all the ins and the outs of when this happened. It's one of these blanks that we have. Somehow Universal saw it within themselves to go purchase that pirated film floating around in America. And Skoll says either it was to get it off the streets and or to research it to see what they could learn from it. The bottom line is it worked for Universal, it worked for Mrs. Stoker, because not too long after that, they purchased the film rights from the stage rights. Now
Right,
that's
right. Because that
Right.
1931 movie is based on the play, not necessarily the book.
Right. So there's another gray area. The book, as both you gents know, and your listeners do too, is really complicated book when it comes to turning it into a stage play, then a film. So I would imagine they were thinking, well, Dean and Balderson have had success. They've already turned it into a stage play, which is they've already cut out all these scene changes and all these different locations, which was complicated. And as you know too, Mike, because you and I have talked about it, they've merged characters. So half of the sort of exploration of dramatizing the story has been done. They then bought the dramatic rights, and Florence did very well with that sale. She ended up getting a sizable amount of money, and she lived very comfortably. And that's that's why I say all is well as ends well. You've got a film that survived. That's a very interesting film. It's again, I'm not a film guy that knows about German expressionism, but I certainly enjoy watching it, and I certainly enjoy watching what people have done to update it and put more intertitles in, make good music scores. So, at the end of the day, Bram Stoker, being the legal guy that he was, a clerk in the Petty Sessions legal department, became an inspector of all clerks around Ireland, wrote a legal manual. He protects his own plays, his own stories for stage. Little did he know he would need to do the same for film. And life goes on. Mrs. Stoker does well. So that's the sort of the condensed version, gents, of what my research showed me, and that when my son and I wrote this story for Scream Magazine, who are celebrating, as you are, the 100th anniversary, and with Holder Mandel helping me from Germany, I think we gave a pretty good perspective from the Stoker family that, great film, glad it's still out there, but also the precedent was set that legally you got to do what you got to do right.
Right, because on the one hand,
very
it's a
much
classic movie that we are so thankful has survived. But on the other hand, it was an incident, and as you pointed out, everything was new at this time. Nobody really knew, what licensing and film. Certainly, film was still pretty new. So rights were, especially international rights, et cetera, et cetera. It looks like they did know enough to change, obviously, the names of the characters, as well as some of the plot of the movie. But and I could talk to you forever about legal licensing with Dracula and Stoker, because that stuff is like I'm sure fascinating along throughout the years. But as far as you mentioned it real briefly there, but I was kind of wondering your personal take on the film, on Nosferatu. If there's anything that you feel that it gets right, do you appreciate it? Is it a accurate or at least decent interpretation of Bram Stoker's Dracula?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, obviously, nothing is really faithful to the novel. I mean, the closest
True.
the BBC's miniseries in 1977 with Louis Jourdan.
Louis Jourdan, yeah.
As far as being, the first out of the blocks with the technology they had at the time, they certainly had the creepiest Count Orlok / Dracula that came out for a long time. And it's kind of nice because when the story was adapted on the stage, all the actors were, suave, debonair, aristocratic looking Draculas, which is not Bram's Dracula. The closest Dracula was what was Shrek and his Count Orlok. So that was, to me, the most, openly close thing to Bram's story. They also, I thought, which was cool, since they had been suffering in Germany, from these contagious diseases, plagues that brought on by the rats. I love that, because the digging that I did into the research of Dracula, Bram draws, similar parallels, but he doesn't show it in the book as much. That's part of his creation of the vampire myth emerged, and it's in Bram's notes, the tuberculosis outbreak in New England, the other things that he writes in the Jane Stoddard interview, that this came from the Middle Ages. So that was another cool thing that Murnau did, was tie the myth of the vampire to real horrors that were knocking on the front door of Germans and of these villagers. So that made the story realistic, and that willful suspension of disbelief. Is this stuff real? So, Mike, those are the two big things. And of course, the switching back and forth of locations. I like the way they did that. And even though there wasn't, dialogue, you certainly get the idea that it's kind of constantly changing, sort of like the book did, different perspectives. And other movies haven't done that, because it's complicated to do. So those are really my big three things. Is you get the feel of the epistolary style of the novel with the changes of visual perspective often throughout the story. So that's what I think.
There was a remake in 1979, and there's going to be apparently a new movie of a new version of Nosferatu that's being, I think, currently produced as we speak. Do you know if is the Nosferatu rights tied in with Dracula now, where they have to admit or they have to acknowledge Bram Stoker and whenever a Nosferatu project is made? Do you know that?
I don't know that. I know it is probably not any clearer than it was back in the day, because
100 years ago.
yeah, but I mean, this is what I've read, and this is how kind of crazy it is. Even though the rights were acknowledged at the time, they were for Mrs. Stoker to sell or use as she wants. When she won the court case and the film was supposedly destroyed, it was destroyed in Germany. So did she win that, and therefore that's over? But when the other ones went to other countries where there was no Berne Convention, what does that really mean? And now that they've been remade and the film rights were sold to Universal, who actually is the one that holds the rights? You see, Dracula literary is from the literary standpoint is in public domain, 1962. Right. So the book is out of Stoker's, the family's control. The only things we have control over, and I do represent my two cousins, the great grandsons, in Bram's intellectual property and our protection and promotion of it, is things that were not published, his image and his signature, not the things that have gone to public domain. So honestly, I think Universal would have a dog in the fight when it comes to film rights. And I don't really want to, pay thousands and thousands of dollars to a lawyer to say, oh, you guys didn't have those rights anyway. They were gone when the film was destroyed in Germany. So my great question, I don't know. Maybe there's a lawyer listening to
I was going to say, I'm like, oh, is history going to repeat itself like it did 100 years ago? Are you going to go after the new production? The Stoker family is going to go after the new production of Nosferatu, but no, it's all good. I'm sure that they will acknowledge Bram. I mean, I know that the almost every version that I've seen of Nosferatu has. I mean, it's pretty much public knowledge now that it was based on Dracula, and that Bram Stoker's vision. It's just another version of Bram Stoker's original vision. But we appreciate your time and your perspective on this. What have you? I know you're a busy guy. What have you got going on? What can we help promote for you?
Well, I'll tell you one thing you can help promote, because it's hot off the press. For the last 3 years, I've been working on an annotated Dracula for the 125th anniversary. And I was working on it with a wonderful scholar, Robert 18 Bissang, who's one of the two people who wrote transcribed the Dracula notes along with Elizabeth Miller. But over the last 2 years, during COVID, both of these scholars have died. And my good friend Robert Basseng died about 3 weeks after we finished our final edit. He went in the hospital with a heart attack, and it wasn't a serious one, but he was getting prepped for a stint, and he was on the blood thinners to help everything else. And he got out of bed. He shouldn't have, against the orders of the hospital, to go to the loo, and he tripped over all the wires and he banged his head. And Mike, just like Renfield, he ended up with a terrible brain bleed, and the fact that he was on thinners, they couldn't do anything to save him.
Oh,
so
man.
he
I'm
lost
sorry to hear
consciousness.
that.
Wow.
His wife sat with him and read to him for about 12 hours, and then he finally expired. So I'm really proud to bring this book. Hellbound Publishing is putting it out. And what's cool about it, guys, is that it has all the references to the missing 101 pages of the Dracula typescript. It's got from Dracula's notes, what were the original chapters. We don't have the chapters, but we've got what they were, explanations of what they were. We also have, excuse me, we actually have many references highlighted in the story by underlining what was cut out of the typescript, because Basseng is one of the guys who was able to analyze it. So we know all the things that were taken out at the last moment. We also see the 30,000 words that are highlighted in a dark grayscale, kind of shading over the 30,000 words that Bram had to extract to make the first abridged edition. So you've essentially got sort of a 3-for-1 book. You see his Dracula notes interspaced within the story. You see that what was taken out in the typescript, and then you see the abridged edition, along with 1,400 footnotes that Robert and I felt were worthy, of inclusion, because many other people have done excellent annotations before us, and we wanted to comment on those. So it's at Amazon. Dracula, annotated for the 120th anniversary by Dacre Stoker and Robert 18 Basseng, and that's his last words. Robert was a kind of guy that always loved to get the last word, so he's sitting up there in heaven looking at us going, by golly, go buy it, because I get the last word now.
Yeah, and I haven't got it yet, but I don't need an excuse for another version of Dracula on my shelf, but that is I'll make shelf space for that for sure. Anything else?
No, just have a safe Halloween, a scary Halloween, and hope to see you on the circuit like I normally do, at all the places we get together and talk spooky things. So I'll be in Dublin, Ireland during Halloween. Where are you going to be, Mike?
I am well, first of all, I'm going to miss seeing you, because we always see each other at Monsterama, and I'm going to Monsterama, the one-day thing this week. As people listening to this, I've already been there, but so I'll miss seeing you there for sure. And I don't have my exact Halloween plans just yet, but this is a great month. I celebrate it all month, so
who doesn't in this world? So I'm about to go and do a little presentation tonight out here in Clayton, California. So thank you guys for having me on the show. All the listeners,
absolutely,
stay scary, and think Bram Stoker next time you see Dracula. Thanks,
awesome, awesome. Thanks, Dacre.
Bye-bye.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back in a moment. And we are going to be talking all about, how do you say it?
Nosferatu.
Nosferatu. Nosferatu.
Don't say it. He'll show up.
Nope.